Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Eric Lanask. I'm with TMC, and it's my pleasure to kick off today's live webinar. Hopefully, you can all see on your screens the title of today's session is called Hidden Costs to Consider When Choosing a Backup Vendor. Why are we having this conversation? Well, you all know data really is a new currency. Last year, it's been reported that more than 59 zettabytes of data was created, consumed, captured, and copied across the world. That's about 161 exabytes per day. And by 2024, that figure is expected to about triple on a daily basis. All of that data, of course, has become the cornerstone of business operations. And that means that storage, management, security, all of those things, and backup are critical to business success. The challenge, though, today is that today's IT landscape, as helpful, beneficial, and in many ways efficient as it is, also brings increased risk and opportunities for that data to be lost, corrupted, stolen, or hijacked. And in fact, the unprecedented circumstances of this past year only added to the complexities of data management and security with a massive and sudden move to remote working combined with an already rising rate of cyber threats. And that, of course, was driven much higher during the pandemic. These threats, of course, are in addition to all of those normal um, data and backup needs, like power outages, human error, hardware failure, all of these things that can also cause your data to be lost. It's why businesses really must have backup solutions in place. And as they are with so many of their other services, they're increasingly leaning on managed service providers to deliver that service. It's not a nice to have anymore, it's a must have. And that in turn means it's a great opportunity for managed services providers. I already noted data, it's always at risk. But in addition to that, there are many regulated industries that require data backup and recovery for compliance purposes. Security breaches and other incidents that lead to lost or corrupted data can come with a huge business and financial implication. As far as MSPs go, it's yet another tool they can add to their portfolios to increase their value as partners to their customers. And of course, it's an opportunity for them to grow their monthly recurring revenue by capturing more of their customers' budgets rather than losing it to competitors. The truth, though, is MSPs have so many options today when it comes to managed backup as a service. It's become a really competitive market, and there are lots of vendors that are offering, what seem to be very attractive cost models. The fact, though, is that some of them are ignoring these hidden costs that we're here to talk about today, costs that can increase overall costs and expenses for MSPs, which they ultimately either have to absorb or pass on to their customers, neither of which is particularly useful for growth. So today, for this conversation about these hidden costs and what you can do about them, I'm joined by Nathan Farge. I'm sorry, Nathan, who's a VP of Strategic Solutions at NovaBACKUP, and Adam Stuflick, who is a Cloud Business Manager at NovaBACKUP. Gentlemen, thank you. So glad that you're with us today.
No worries. Thanks for having us. Yeah.
And so, as I mentioned, Nathan and Adam are with me for a discussion about all of these hidden costs that may not be immediately apparent to MSPs, until you start seeing your invoices. We're going to talk about how MSPs can better manage their backup as a service expenses so they can deliver maximum value to their customers while also maximizing their own profits. Now, before we get into a roundtable style discussion with Nathan and Adam, I do want to give Adam a few minutes to set the stage for today's discussion with a little bit of insight into NovaBACKUP. And we've also left, of course, some time at the end of today's session for your questions. So I encourage you all to submit them to us at any time throughout today's session. And last but not least, certainly feel free to take a look. We have 3 handouts in the handouts section of your interface that can provide some additional information, including the slide deck from today. So with that, again, thank you everybody for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to Adam for a few minutes.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so a little bit about the NovaBACKUP Corp. In case some of you aren't familiar with our name, we are headquartered out of Agora Hills. What's really good about this is everything's in that office. So I know a lot of times, me being even a previous MSP, Nathan as well, the support system, who's going to talk to me, how am I going to get a hold of you? Not only that, the support system alone, but the development of the software, the sales, anybody that you guys are going to be talking to, dealing with the NovaBACKUP products all in-house, which is great. So we've been serving MSPs, businesses, you name it, for about 20 plus years, probably a little even more than that, honestly, dealing solely with backup side of things, right? That's our niche. That's where we're pros at, and that's where we want to stay, and that's where we have stayed for the whole remainder of that time. So with that, staying in our realm and our expertise, we are, industry and vertical market experts. And what I mean by that, just as an example with the vertical market, is that particular niche, right? The professional office, or even to take it further down into the medical type realm. And I'll even take it one step further, is the dental market. Right now, it's huge. It's blowing up everywhere. They have certain needs that they need covered. And a lot of people are hunting right now for particular providers that can offer them a solution, a very secure solution, but as well, right? We're talking about medical field, things like that. And that's where you can see there we are HIPAA seal of compliance. It was a pretty big process to go through, but we're proud of that. Also, where is your data being held? Is that data center secure? Things like SOC 1 and SOC 2 audits. These things are very important, and reports obviously that we can give to you guys, as well as you can always give that to your customer for peace of mind. We're very flexible, not only with the product, right? You don't have to have any particular way you're going to have to implement it. We have different types of ways that you can secure data, whether it's image, local backup, offsite backup, you name it. You pick whatever way you want to do it, or all the above. But also how we work with customers, right, as the MSPs. You guys have to be flexible, which of course makes us have to be flexible with you. How are we going to roll it out? We can help you with that. What's the billing like? We can help you with that. How am I going to resell this, right? We can give you tips and tricks and things that we've learned, obviously, not only personal experience, right, because we have a ton of that in-house, but also, we talk with you guys all the time. We talk with all of our MSPs monthly, which is great. We have a nice little round table, and we pick up information from them. We're always learning. So we'll get into a little bit of that, obviously, too. I don't want to jump the gun, but we'll start talking about that as well through the next slides.
Great, thanks, Adam. As I mentioned, we're going to get into some discussion. You're looking at the topics. We're going to start with some questions about licensing, get into some requirement issues. Of course, no discussion will be complete without features and services. I mentioned the need for compliance, especially in many regulated industries. So we want to touch on that a little bit. And of course, vendor selection. There's some things that MSPs should be asking, should be looking for when they consider the vendors that they're working with. So let's get into some licensing conversation, and certainly Nathan and Adam, I want this to be conversational, so feel free to jump in at any time, cut each other off. Let's have a little fun with this, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about licensing, can we talk a little bit about some of the common licensing structures that you see in the backup space, especially backup targeting MSPs?
Yeah, there's a number of different licensing that we've seen from any type of vendors. I mean, whether it's per agent, per customer, per storage and bucket storage, or anything like that. One of the common ones is, I would say per agent is one of the more common ones. When you do a per agent and then include like a cloud storage upcharge on how much are you using on the storage, or some vendors we've seen do like a per agent fee and it includes so much cloud storage too. We're even seeing some people charge for like the amount of local storage they're using too. Adam, do you have any other thoughts on some of the licensing things that we've seen?
Yeah, honestly, like you said, that's kind of the main one. And that's, again, where you're going to have to, like, how am I going to resell this? And is it going to back the MSP into the corner a little bit on that type of licensing sometimes, right? When you have such a specific licensing model like a per machine, especially with COVID, right? When people were working from home or forced to work from home. And you're forced to protect that machine, right, as a business, and you're also going to expect that of your MSP. So you got to be careful, right, when you're getting into the per machine thing. Whether or not it comes with a block of storage, a lot of times I think you're right. I'm seeing it more now. And it really comes off like you might get a great deal on the per machine because they're throwing like, 250 gig on it or 500 gig. And they're like, well, I have 36 terabytes available to me. But it's like, well, how much are you really using of that 36, right? I mean, all of a sudden your price per gig starts going a little bit higher because you're only using about 2 terabytes of your whole big whopping 36 terabyte pool or whatever you have, right? So again, it comes into play with just being aware. Ask a lot of questions of your vendor. So,
well, and one other thing I wanted to talk about on that was we've seen a couple vendors just recently come out with some new licensing plans that are really confusing on like being point based and all this other stuff that they have to report into, and we're here, we're looking at these licensing schemes. I'm like, how in the world? We deal with this every day, and we couldn't figure out how to license it right if I wanted to do just like a normal maybe 10, 20 small businesses or something like that.
Yeah, so, when you have to have a PowerPoint with about 6 slides to break down your pricing structure, that's
something's wrong. Yeah.
And there's colorful arrows they're pointing everywhere, and they're crisscrossing on this this PowerPoint slide, and I'm like, holy moly! I mean, I could put our whole licensing package. I don't even want to call it that. I'll just call it pricing package in less than a paragraph. It's in no PowerPoint needed. So yeah, it gets pretty crazy out there with how people are billing, and it's it limits an MSP a lot, in my opinion, because you should really make it a little bit more free for the MSP to charge how they want to charge. But if you're putting them in a small avenue of like licensing or however they're selling it to the MSP, it really doesn't give you a lot of options when it comes to reselling it at all.
Yeah, I agree.
So how does storage calculation play into the equation, right? Is there consistency across vendors how they do it, or do different vendors do it differently? And I guess the same question or same scenario then would apply. Is it complex? Does it have to be complex?
No, it shouldn't be complex. Sometimes it is complex or sneaky, if I want to say that. One of those terms, because actually I've asked a lot of MSPs, and they're like, I'm like, how are you getting billed? Like, well, storage. And I said, well, how are they looking at your storage, right? Are they looking at it like selected? Are they forcing you into a bucket right away, no matter what, right? By purchasing a license or whatever they're referring to it as, or is it protected? Which, in my opinion, is almost like the biggest sneaky term out there, because and the thing is, they'll come out with you at such a small price per gig, it looks like crazy. You're like, whoa, that's really cheap. But then you get this thing where you back up a 50 gig database 5 times, and now you're 250 gig protected. So again, I just tell people, you have to ask these vendors, how exactly are they looking at your storage? I mean, it's such, because you're talking about pennies to dollars to hundreds of dollars to, it adds up really, really quick. So and again, it's not common across everybody. I think it's a little bit of how they're looking at it, or again, they got the per license per machine. But I think a lot of people look at selected. Nate, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is totally fair, but again, that's their choice. So.
Well, I want to add a little bit to that. So when we say bucket, we deal with this day in, day out. When we say a storage bucket, that's like saying I'm getting 1 terabyte of storage, and then I have to fill that in. I fill that up, but I'm prepaying for that 1 terabyte worth of storage. Whereas if you do like more of a consumption-based licensing storage solution, that's paying for like per gig fee, like if I'm using 151 gig, I'm paying for 151 gig. So those are the two main types of storage type licensing or pricings that we've seen. But then, like Adam said, you get into all these other types of storage, I'll call it calculations, whether it's, on the agent selected, what you're using in the cloud as compressed or uncompressed. We've seen some people charging like for uncompressed storage, or I'll call it selected storage. We're also seeing, depending on the vendor and what storage they're using, we're also seeing people charge for the number of versions of data out there, or even as far as, if you have some S3 providers, that type of thing, will charge you by, if I put a Word document in the storage and I delete it the next day, that's fine, but I still have to pay for that storage that Word document occupied for the next 30 or 90 days, depending on your contract. So there's all these little things that you have to take into account when you're just looking at what am I actually paying for in cloud storage.
Yeah, and overages. Keep that in mind too.
Yeah.
The bucket models might sound great to you because it might be cheap or something like that, but I tell you what, go 1 gig over that, and
just like a cell phone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The old days of cell phone, because a lot of times it's unlimited now, but yeah. Back in the day, too many texts or too much data, you get a shocker of a bill. So.
Well, so too much is one side, but to what extent do MSPs have to worry about minimums, upfront costs, onboarding costs, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of times, and again, I think this all comes down to how can I get the biggest return on investment right away, right? Sometimes it's shocker costs, right? These big upfront costs that are forced on a lot of people. They're like, well, man, I'm going to need 5, 10, 15, 20 customers right away, and where other people are like, well, that's no problem. I already have 20. But the thing is, we deal a lot with like the smaller MSPs too, and that's such a big concern for them on, do I have an upfront cost? Do I have a huge minimum? Do I have to pay for support? Or do I have a token I can buy? I mean, we're not like an arcade. We're actually, human beings, and we're going to help you out if you need help. No such thing as token-based support or levels of support. That's another thing too that I feel is really unfair. You call into support here at NovaBACKUP, and whoever you get on the phone is going to be the guy that's going to solve your problem. That's another big thing, but anyways, yeah, it's a big concern with a lot of people. I think everybody opens up with me is how much it's going to cost right away versus what it can do. So first of all, we got to put them at ease that our pricing structure is very easy. And then we get into the technical things, but no, there's definitely concerns, and they're out there. The big upfront costs, the forced pricing on forced hardware. I mean, it's happening a lot more and more. So it's definitely causes MSPs to have their guard up right away. When I talk with them, it almost feels like, they have to be on guard when they talk with me right away. And I put them at ease. Let's drop down that wall. And, again, we have a very easy solution. So.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to add is there are a lot of different, people that have different minimums and other things, but almost every MSP that we talk to, whether or not they're looking to come to us or someone else, they typically already have a solution in place. So they're already paying for another solution. You need to think about what those minimums are going to do for you, or how you can get away from those minimums, or even talk to the company saying, hey, I'm doing a switchover from XYZ backup solution to this solution. Is there any way you can give a break for that time as I'm transitioning into it? That's where I think some of these vendors really need to look into.
I agree. Yep.
So you guys have kind of gotten into some of the hidden costs that we're really talking about today. Are there any other things that MSPs can get caught off guard by that they should be aware of?
Specifically with licensing, I think we touched on a lot of things. One of the things that some people don't think about, because it's not something that you always think about when you're starting a new contract with another company or what have you, is what does that contract actually say? Am I locked in for a year? What's my exit clause? What does that look like if I need to, pull away from this solution because for whatever reason, I lose a bunch of customers or it's just not fitting for me? What does that kind of look like, and what type of penalties or what's really happening when I need to move off of the solution? Because people flux in and out depending on how things are doing, both in their world and their customers' world.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, who wants to sign a 3-year contract to get the best price right now in this current environment? Not a lot of people. I can guarantee you that. Obviously, the price goes down substantially, but why not give the MSP a little bit of a break? It's like, well, maybe the 1 year we can get to good pricing versus the 3. It's just, I don't know. That's just a really big risk. Is a 2-year, 3-year contracts just seem a little out of the norm, in my opinion, right now. But it happens. It's asked of MSPs all the time. And personally, yeah, I just don't think that's the best route.
Yeah.
Let's move on to talk about some requirements and issues with concerns with requirements. Are there some specific requirements that might be often neglected or not talked about as much when MSPs are looking for a new backup solution or vendor?
There's a lot of stuff that we're seeing out there. I mean, some vendors are requiring you to purchase whatever hardware that they require and put it into your customer's environment, and you basically don't. It's a black box that you don't have any insight into that you're putting on your network. That, as an IT guy, bothers me. I'm just putting a black box that I don't have, full access to, and it could be a injection point for any number of these ransomware things that we've been seeing out there. So that scares me. It's a black lockdown box that a vendor requires from you. That's one thing. And then some of them are bring your own hardware, which is great. But that hardware requirement for that local box that's just doing storage, we're seeing some larger vendors require a lot of horsepower behind that because they're doing like on-site dedupe and all this other stuff. That it's great, but that's a lot of hardware to have to outlay just to do simple backup, restore, and disaster recovery in a lot of places. Another thing that one of my colleagues brought up is, there's the onboarding requirement, there's the installation requirement, but when you're talking about restoring data or actually in a disaster type thing, you need to look at the requirements that you need to actually do one of those disaster recoveries. We found out from a MSP that was leaving a different company that was going to us. The reason they were leaving is because in order to recover, even from a local backup, you needed to be that machine had to be on the internet to connect to the controller for the other product that they're moving off of. And in a disaster, you might not have internet, you might not have any of that stuff, and all of a sudden you have a local backup that you can't recover from. That's not a real good disaster recovery plan.
Yeah,
so
definitely no.
Thinking about those, yeah.
Yeah, the other thing, or sorry, the other thing is speed a lot of times too, right? The way that people kind of handle data, again, it's forcing that MSP into a certain niche. Like, how are they treating the data? Is it a full image every time, or is it requiring them a full, once every 7 backups or whatever it may be? You got to really start looking at your upload speeds. And like I mentioned at the intro, we've been around for a very long time, and we're talking back in the dial-up days. The way that we handle data cures a lot of that, right? We're talking about block level incrementals, the way that we do it. We're fast-bit, basically that's the term for it. But anyways, and also data's growing huge. You mentioned at the beginning, right? It's just gonna keep growing. But you still have the requirements to keep stuff up in the cloud. Well, to help kind of cure that, and a lot of people will do this, is initial seeding. We offer that, right? You put your initial seed to a drive, you ship it to our data center, we upload it, boom, you just start sending the block level incrementals. Well, and there's no charge for that with us. That's a big plus. Now, when you're talking about some other guys, you're talking $200, $300, $400 to just do that. Again, that's one of those upfront costs in a sense, right? That you could avoid, or in my opinion, should avoid. That's a lot of money to try to make backup with just solely backup, right? That's a lot of storage you got to keep doing, and it just extends that time when you're actually going to start making money again. So that's another thing I see a lot.
Well, and when you talk about speed too, something that we're proponents of, and you know, we really recommend is having both local and cloud-based backups. You know, pulling down a terabyte from the cloud, that takes a lot longer than pulling a terabyte off of like a NAS or something like that. So making sure that the vendor that you choose, the software that you choose, and the hardware that you either are required to or choose can actually, you know, do the SLAs that you're really wanting to do for your customers is a huge thing. So those are some of those things that some MSPs that we've seen out there aren't really, you know, fully understanding, and it can bite them in the end.
Yeah, 100%. And that repair thing, it just kind of popped in my head because again, we hear a lot of nightmare stories, guys. So I'll share another one with you. Is there was a particular vendor, they signed their maintenance contract, which again, no one really likes doing, but you have to do it with some guys. And their maintenance contract covered upgrades, but for a certain version. So when these guys released, let's say 7. Whatever, right? They couldn't get that because their maintenance agreement only covered them for 6.x, right? So again, you got to ask questions, and if they ever hesitate to not answer that question, it's probably something.
Yeah.
Just start looking. There's lots of us out there. Make sure ask questions. That's all I can say, and you should always be upfront with you, as transparent as possible. So.
Let's talk about features a little bit.
Yeah.
Certainly something that MSPs are going to want to know about, and especially when it comes to cost. Is it common for vendors to basically charge by feature or capability?
Yeah, I mean, you see it a lot, and then it's just plain as day too, which is kind of nice because the MSP knows what they're getting into. But again, with the niche that we were in, like the professional office, the medical type field, or dental, whatever you want to talk about, there always is some type of database-driven stuff out there, whether it's MSSQL or some other database variant. And a lot of people will actually charge for that to be able to have plugin support, is what we call it, right? Whether it's MSSQL, Exchange, Hyper-V, VMware, these are all what we consider plugins. Someone call them features or whatever it might be, but they charge for that 100%. They also charge if it's even on a server or on a workstation differently, and all this stuff. And all that stuff adds up so much. And you got to be careful too with some of these guys. Again, don't get caught in this like price trap, I call it. We already talked about a little bit of a price trap and how they view your data. But the price trap is also, what happens if I want to back up my program files directory? Because maybe I have something in there that dumps into that directory, like the output of a database or my program I'm working on. And guess what? Some of these guys automatically exclude that program files directory. They won't let you back it up. They just let you back up only documents or anything like that. So you got to be careful with that stuff too. And they don't really outright tell you that a lot of times. Again, we hear nightmare stories. Well, I thought I had that selected. Guess turns out so-and-so doesn't let us do program files. So be careful and stuff like that.
Yeah, but we've seen a number of things on that. We've seen vendors, you know, charge for local backup compared to cloud backup, compared to,
Yes.
Oh, you want to back up that data that's on that NAS over there. Well, you know, that's great, but we're going to charge you X amount of money per like gig of data that you're pulling from that NAS, which is just crazy. I mean, what it comes down to is data, and it should have the same same price, that you're backing up. It shouldn't matter that it's a SQL database compared to, some photo from mom or what have you. It should have the same price when you're talking about what you're having to spend per month with a vendor.
Yeah, or at least leave that up to the MSP, right? If the MSPs want to charge for it, that's great. I think you guys should maybe, right? But we as vendors shouldn't, again, force you into a particular way that you have to charge your people. Like if we force charge SQL, you would have to do that too. Maybe you don't want to do that. But again, these are all things that you overlook and then you start implementing it. And you're like, oh man, what I quoted these guys is going to be way different, right? And we all know you give a sucker to a baby and take it away, it's going to be problems. It's going to be the same way with your customers. So again, it's something you got to look out for that stuff.
So this is certainly not a new question, but curious what your thoughts are on image versus file-based backups.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It's almost a religious question in some places when you're talking to MSPs. Some people, it has to be image. Nothing else is good. I want to be able to bring that machine back up, right how it was. Where there's other MSPs that we talk to that, all I care about is the actual business productivity data, and I can spin up a new VM, a new machine via, my automation in less time than it takes to actually restore that image. And that way I'm not even paying for all that data, so there's a couple different types of viewpoints there. We kind of give you the best of both worlds, as in you can do images and you do file and folder level backup, or the actual data backup. But there's other vendors out there that are image only, file backup only, and in some cases, really heavy into virtualization, which is fine, which is more of a image only type backup. And all of a sudden, when you're in one of these vendors that is an image only type backup, you're paying for a lot of data that you really don't care about, in my mind. You're backing up, the Windows directory and all this other stuff that, in the end, you're not really gonna care about, because you can rebuild it. So there's pluses and minuses both ways. Adam, I think you've had a lot of conversations around this.
I've had a ton. Yeah. The great Reddit war of the last decade, I guess, is image versus file and folder. You can go out there and they're everywhere. But I mean, why not do both? I'll just put it simply. Why can't, or just give the option of both? And that's what we do. And solve the argument. Here you go. Here's both options.
Do what you want.
Yeah.
Just that, I guess, speaks a little more to the whole kind of a trend towards flexibility that you guys have been really consistent on throughout the first half of our session today. I've actually talked to a couple of folks I know who work in IT departments, and they've actually had situations where they've needed to have drives shipped from their backup vendor in order to do their recovery. Is that common? Speaking to them, it seemed like a very time-consuming process.
Yeah, I mean, even from what I'm hearing, there's a oil company out east that would probably really like some recovery from what it sounds like they had backed out there. Yeah. We've seen a lot of this over the last, probably about 12 months, because of the pandemic and everything like that, and because of all of the new ransomware and everything else that's out there. Pulling down that terabyte or plus, or multiple terabytes worth of data over the wire, that's just not going to do it. When a doctor's office is on fire, and basically you need that data tomorrow when your new Dell box is coming in, and that type of thing, or you have something at your location. So thinking about how I can get that data from the cloud when a disaster happens, it is a really big thing, especially how much is that going to cost? Say you're putting a bunch of data in Amazon S3, which is great. It's cheap. It's a good solution, but getting the data out of there in a timely manner on one of their snowballs or what have you, what is that going to cost and what's the timeline look like on that? We've done some interesting things in the past. Actually, the most interesting one that I remember was about 6 months ago. It was a dentist's office in this case. They wanted the data back. It was 700, 800 gig or something like that. They wanted the data back that next morning because they were having putting new data, new computers in, new servers and that type of thing. And they called us up at like 3 or 4 o'clock the night before, and they didn't have the server ready or anything like that. But we actually used FedEx courier service. The courier came to the data center and grabbed the encrypted data, flew it out to the customer, and they were on the East Coast, and it got there by 7 a.m. Try doing that with some of these public cloud vendors. That's really tough, and even if they will do it, that's going to cost a lot of money. Whereas in our case, all we charged them for was the freight and the USB hard drive that we threw it on. So figuring out what that's going to cost or what that's going to look like when that happens is something you really need to take into consideration.
Yeah.
Let's talk about services. Certainly another area of interest for MSPs. You guys have talked about some of the reasons behind MSPs needing to replace a backup solution, or obviously there are others who are just looking to expand their service offerings and get into backup for the first time. What are some of the things that they may need to consider when they're either looking to deploy a new or replace an existing backup solution?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people are concerned with how they're going to deploy it, right? How many man hours, how many men and women total they're going to need to put on board to do this, and is someone going to help me, right? A lot of times I think a lot of people are out there, they sign their agreement or whatever it is, they pay their bill, and that's it, right? We have a KB, we have this, blah, 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 have fun, right? And I don't think that's fair at all. So that's one thing you got to be considered of, like how long is it going to take to roll this out? Because Nate was talking before, you most likely you already have another solution, right? So how are we going to transfer all these people over to here? Are we going to do it incrementally, maybe 3, 4 people at a time, mass rollout, whatever it is, maybe depending on when your contract ends? These are all things you gotta worry about, and who's going to help. And we offer full support, professional services, you name it, right? You need help. It's not a one-time thing. We have always access to our calendars and things like this where the MSP can pick a time and frame, carve out an hour or whatever we need, and we'll get that done. Whether it's 1 deployment, 2, 3, 4, 5, it does not matter. So, that's one thing you should ask. Again, questions. You should be asking these people when you go to these vendors, are we going to get help? Right, or some type of training or anything like that. We have a team that needs trained. These are all things that I think you should consider. And that's just one small aspect, by the way, but that's just one thing I get asked of all the time. So,
well, and to add to that a little bit, we've seen some vendors where you actually have to have people, quote unquote, certified on their solution and pay for like whatever training and that type of thing to even get access to their support. And depending on what your turnover is at your MSP or even how much that is, that can add quite a bit of overhead to selecting a vendor like that. So making sure that you understand, okay, that's great up front, but what happens 6 months down the line when Joe decides he wants to do something else and leaves, but he was my only certified tech in for this company, and now I have to either do it myself or get someone else to do it in order to even get support. that adds a lot of overhead to it.
Yeah, yeah, and when I see testing there too, I think of almost testing your investment out, right? You're not just investing in like the backup software, you're investing in the support, the company, all these things, right, are factors. They might have a really good product and all that stuff, but when you have that problem, and you will, right? It's not all sunshine and rainbows in the MSP world. You're gonna have to get a hold of the support team. You're gonna have, someone to help you. And you need to test that aspect out too when you're doing these trials. Hopefully they even offer you a trial, because sometimes that's not even an option. But anyways, when you're trialing a software or a vendor rather, you're not just trialing the software. Keep that in mind. You got to trial that test, you got to trial that support system out, their KB, their help systems, right? Whether it's chat or something like that, you need to test that as well, not just the software. So
you guys have both kind of started touching on support, and over the course of the last 10, 15 years, just across the IT industry, I found that people I've talked to, I hear one of two stories about support. It's either A+ or it's an F. It's
Right.
not. I don't often hear a lot of sort of, it's okay, it's decent. What are you guys hearing? Specifically when it comes to support for around backup.
Well, one of the things that bothers me when you're talking to you're talking about an MSP focused product. If the people that you're talking to for support as an MSP, and if you know more than the person on the other end of the phone, you're not going to have a good experience. Let's put it that way. The whole tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, that type of thing, that doesn't play well when you're talking to an MSP that they they've already done steps 1 through 10 of this script. Asking them to reboot or do what have you, that's not a good use of anyone's time. So talking to someone that understands, okay, you know what you're doing, you've probably done all the normal stuff, talk to them, make sure that everything's good. That's kind of what I expect when I'm dealing with an MSP type vendor. I've heard some really bad horror stories, through different MSPs that they actually have to go through, like their channel partner that they're using to purchase the software. They have to talk to that support person first. That support person then talks to the vendor support person, and then eventually I might get an answer, in the next day or two, instead of immediately contacting the person at support that knows what the heck they're doing.
Yep.
You've got, I also feel like we're seeing more and more vendors kind of dipping their hands into a variety of different solutions, trying to offer more, intrusion detection, all kinds of security solutions, networking, and what have you. Personally, I feel like sometimes they're trying to do too much and kind of trying to be a jack of all trades, master of none, which kind of speaks a little towards Nathan, the comments you just made around support. But what are your thoughts on that? I'm curious.
Yeah, so just an example, because a lot of times they start focusing on these new things, right? Because it's trendy or whatever, because ransomware and all that, and then all of a sudden they leave the backup thing in the background. Most of us maybe remember when we used to be able to go to conferences. That was kind of fun. But I went to a particular vendor's booth, just wanted to go in there and see what was going on. Not one single time did they mention anything about their backup at all. And it seems like it's been like that for the last 2 to 3 years. You go to the particular page, or you go to any type of virtual, webinars and things like that, and there is zero mention of their backup. It's all about IDS and AV software and blah, blah, blah. Nothing about their backup. And to me, that is highly concerning, because that's what's technically protecting that data too. Yes, intrusion detection is great, AV is great, right? But there's no 100% proof against ransomware, rather, in my opinion, than backup. a well-implemented backup, that is, not lazily. But yeah, to me, it feels like that sometimes when these guys go out and all these branch out, they're leaving their backup stuff behind. So that's what I'm finding.
Well, and then you also have to take into account, if this vendor is doing all these things besides backup, how much effort in development and in the support people are actually happening in the backup side. So if you have someone that's focused on just backup and disaster recovery, that's a different thing. But the thing that also bothers me is if you're deploying a solution that has backup, ransomware protection, AV, PSA, RMM, switching, and everything else in the world, that it's your one-stop shop to get everything. That seems really convenient until that one-stop shop kind of either decides, oh, I don't want to do XYZ anymore, and just drops your product, or they get compromised somehow. We all know about the product that got compromised earlier this year. That was kind of this one-stop shop. That's one of the big risks you have. Yeah, it's convenient, but it's also a big target.
Yep. Yeah, and then you start adding in all these services and all these different avenues that you're going down, and then all of a sudden you need a PowerPoint again to explain your pricing sheet because it takes up like 5 pages of a PowerPoint. So again, it's all about knowing how to resell this stuff too, and it gets asked of me all the time. So I cannot imagine what how much complex it is to try to resell something on that level when it has all these different price points associated with it. So.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's like buying a TV or a wireless router from your grocery store.
Oh, yeah.
Just you're not going to get you're not going to get the answers that you need.
Nope.
Let's talk about compliance. I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, and it certainly is a concern for many MSPs, and certainly for many of their customers. Are there particular kinds of MSPs that you find are most concerned with compliance?
I would say, some of the MSPs that we talk to are very, very vertical focused. And that's the ones that I would say are more apt to really talk about and dig into the regulatory compliance of both the software, the vendor itself, and what the back end kind of looks like. So those types of MSPs, they're usually very, very point on what they're trying to do and what they're trying to look for. One of our MSPs, they drew a line of, they only deal with people that are within 50 miles or 50 minutes of their location, and it's just dentists. So they have one set of everything that they deal with, all these dentists, and they have their compliance and what they need to do for each one of these guys down pat. There's not a lot of MSPs that are that focused on that, but when you're talking about healthcare, education, any of these other things that have regulatory compliance behind it, you really need to make sure that the vendor understands what's happening and what you're doing to make sure that you're compliant. We have a bunch of Canadian customers too, and because they have compliance issues up in Canada, we have a Canadian data center so that that data doesn't leave Canada. Those type of things are what a vendor needs to work with you as an MSP to understand what you're doing to make your life easier and make sure that you are in compliance.
Yeah, you got to know also too where these vendors, the software, where is it being developed, where is it being made? These are all hugely asked questions by customers to MSPs, right? And you should know that. Some being not in the U.S. and other places, obviously right now are hot topics in the news. Probably don't have to say which ones, but you know, these are things you need to be aware of if you're dealing with someone on the level of like medical or school or anything like that.
Or government, yeah, government's a big thing when you're talking about where it's at.
You gotta ask these questions. Otherwise, it could come back and bite you very badly. So.
Oh, and frankly, we're seeing more and more general and broad data privacy regulations being implemented and enacted in different states, regions, countries. So you know, I feel like it's going to be a requirement across the board very soon.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm even hearing and reading some stuff where MSPs can be found at fault for some of the compliance lapses and that type of thing. So it'll fall back to the MSP if they're not doing their things right.
So, you know, how can MSPs be confident or have a comfort level that their vendors are compliant, and you know, are there specific things they should look for or ask? You know, how do they make sure?
That's a good question. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, because I always kind of like, let's just take HIPAA, right? Because I think that's probably the most, you know, popular term. It's a big, I call it a pie a lot of times, right? And we're going to be slices of that pie that will make up that full compliance. I think some of the other responsibilities, like Nate was saying, falls back also on the MSP, and that again is more pieces of that pie. But you need, like we've stressed this whole webinar, like you have to ask those questions, like where's my data being held? You know, okay, it's in a data center, good. It's not in your basement. And again, that happens. You know, okay, so now it's in the data center, great. Now, what about that data center, right? What about it is secure? Do they have audits? Again, we're SOC 1, SOC 2 at our data center, and that is very stringent when we're talking about securities. And then again, a part of HIPAA. So again, you got to make sure all these slices of pie all meet up, all provided, all met. But it's going to take some homework on the MSP side, again, a little bit, and the vendor. You have to ask that vendor all these questions that you're concerned with. If you don't ask, they're not going to tell you, because it might not be the answer that they want to give you, because you might go somewhere else. So if you don't ask it, they're not going to come out and tell you outright. So.
I want to take just one moment to remind our audience that if you do have any questions, you know, now's the time for you to get those to us. Love to answer any questions you guys have. And in the meantime, you know, let's talk a little about vendor selection. You know, at the end of the day, making the right vendor decision is, you know, can be the determining factor whether you have a really strong backup program or, you know, just one that's kind of there. You know, what are the things that MSPs should be looking for, thinking about when going through that vendor selection process?
Yeah, I know we're running a little bit light on time, you know, and we've talked a lot about all of these, I think, in the previous slides, but something that we really didn't talk about is, well, we talked a little bit about the focus of that vendor. You know, if that vendor is focused on what you're trying to do, in this case, backup and disaster recovery, along with how long have they been in the game? Do they kind of know, you know, have they been in the game for a long time and have seen, you know, the progress of the MSPs from ASPs and all this other stuff, and are they keeping up with the evolving trends, making sure that support and training is available to them and everything else. You know, those are some of the highlights that, you know, we've talked about a lot of other things in the previous slides, but Adam, do you have anything else that you wanted to really pinpoint on?
Yeah, when we're talking about asking all the questions all the time, the flexibility and, you know, that to me, that's a number of things, right? Whether the software is flexible in regards to what it allows you to do, but also the pricing, the support system. Don't back yourself in a corner and only be allowed to resell on a certain type of plane in certain type of way, because their pricing system and the support system and the capability of the software is so narrow that it limits you on how am I going to resell it, because that's the biggest concern, is how am I going to resell it. So make sure it's easy, Make sure it's going to be easy to do all the things that we mentioned, from the implementation, getting to support, all that stuff. It just makes your guys' life a heck of a lot easier when it comes to, getting back that return on investment. So.
Ooh, I wanted to add one quick thing, because we didn't really talk about it. Make sure you understand how you're going to get billed and how you have to pay that bill. We've seen some interesting stuff from some other vendors, so that's a big thing.
Yeah, avoid sticker shock.
Yeah,
avoid that. It'll make your life easier, less headaches.
So the bottom line is ask absolutely every question that you can think of. Anything you want to be absolutely certain of, ask the question. The only thing you can do wrong is not ask a question, because then you don't know.
Yeah.
Adam, I want to hand it back over to you before we take some questions from our audience, just to kind of bring us home.
Yeah, exactly. Don't limit yourself to anything. Grow your business as an MSP on your terms. Again, look for that flexibility. Look for the maturity of that particular business. What they got their fingers into, where they've been, the growth of it, and things like that. Because us here at NovaBACKUP, we provide a super easy offering. There is no complexity when it comes to the pricing structure, the rollout, the support. We're all there. It's all included, right? We try to make it as easy as possible. And again, if you want to talk about this like further, when we're talking about pricing structure, the support, all that stuff, reach out to us too. We love speaking with you guys. We carve out hours, multiple hours, whatever it takes to talk with you guys about what we offer, because again, we don't limit you to anything. We do the local, the offsite, the imaging. We have a great monitoring system where you guys can log in at any point in time, take a look at all your installations, who's doing what and when, how much storage are they using. Again, we want to make it simple. We want to save you time, because the time is going to be the money. We want to take away those 14, 15-hour work days and make it shorter. And again, anytime you guys need anything, we're always happy to ask. So we encourage you guys to reach out to us. We'll set up times, we'll talk with you, and answer any of your questions. Again, we're very transparent as a company.
So I want to head back. I want to circle back to kind of some of our earlier topics, and I think one of the things that we hadn't really talked about much is data retention. Different companies have different needs. How does that play into it, and especially in terms of pricing structures and hidden costs?
Yeah, we've seen some customers and vendors do some interesting stuff with retention. I've seen some vendors, charge for, if you want to do like a 7-year retention on the data in the cloud, or even locally, they'll actually charge you a different fee based on that. And some other vendors won't even do that, which is interesting when you're talking about a long-term archiving type solution in some cases that some of these even smaller businesses need. Keeping QuickBooks for 7 years, well, that's pretty important too. It might not seem like a whole lot, but I mean, that's important to keep like that. We've seen some people, you're not able to do granular retention settings for, so maybe all of your customers are only getting a certain amount of retention, whereas you would like to have some specific customers be treated differently in those retention requirements.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, from customer to customer, install to install, even at a single customer, you can have different retention, like whatever you guys would want, from 3 days to 10 weeks to 7 years. I mean, it's your call. Again, we're giving you the options to do that stuff. And also too, when we're talking about 7 years of retention, we're not talking about increasing that cost, crazily. With some people, yeah, because they're going to force you with extra fulls. Might be, again, looking at protected, selected, all these things. But with us, again, everything's after compression with our storage. I mean, that's all your other vendors are doing too. They're taking advantage of compression on their end. So we're doing the same, but we're also giving you that as a cost. Everything's after compression with us. Everything's block level incremental. We never ever have to submit that full again. So it's going to save you money, even if you have to extend that retention out a long time. you don't have to worry about that huge, imploding data costs. So,
Adam, early on in today's session, you made a comment around backup location, where the data is actually being stored is important. So, with that in mind, are most vendors today offering an option of local and cloud? And as an MSP, how do I understand what's best for me?
Yeah, I mean, well, here's the thing. Yeah, they're going to be offering local and cloud, but some people are going to charge you for the local, which I think is a little bit crazy to me. But some people are just cloud only. Some people, depending on where the storage is going to be held, like Nate was saying, it might be some object storage somewhere else. That also, again, comes with certain limitations, right? But yeah, we offer local, not only file and folder, but local imaging too, right? We got a great imaging tool that can do bare metal. You can dump that out to a VHDX, which is pretty cool. You can throw that straight into a Hyper-V solution and use that as a BDR, right? Bring your own BDR or whatever you want to call it. We can work with just about any hardware that's out there. We're pretty hardware agnostic, but yeah, I mean, people do, but again, you got to be careful. You got to ask, like, are they going to charge me for that? But as for us, yeah, we offer it all. Local file folder, offsite file folder, application aware, like our plugins we talked about before, all that stuff can be sent offsite. So.
Excellent, guys. Well, that actually takes us to the end of the time that we have for our session today. For the folks in our audience, if you have additional questions, you want some more information from NovaBACKUP, you'll all be getting contact information in a follow-up email tomorrow. That'll also include information on how you can access the on-demand version of today's conversation, and certainly feel free to pass that detail along to some of your colleagues if they weren't able to join us live today. You see Adam's contact information on the screen today. So if you have a moment to jot that down, please go right ahead and do that. Like I said, otherwise you'll get some contact information in a follow-up email tomorrow. With that, Adam, Nathan, thank you very much for spending some time and sharing your experiences and expertise with our audience. I certainly found it a great conversation. Hopefully they did as well. And thank you to our attendees. Hope you got some value out of today's conversation, and really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy days. So with that, we are out of time for today. Thanks again for everybody for being with us, and have an awesome afternoon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us.